Eventually the teacher even gets cold sometimes. All right, so the inner layer of the retina, it is the retina. The most superficial layer of that is where we have the photoreceptors. We've got two different kinds of photoreceptors. The first kind we're going to talk about is the rod cells. The rod cells kind of are blunt on the ends, and they have a pigment called rhodopsin, which I'm sure you can read about. The big thing I want you to remember and focus on is that our rod cells are what provide us vision in dim light. So when there isn't a whole lot of light in the room, you can still see to not go bumping into the dresser. Thank your rod cells. So they're more sensitive to light, no color. They detect, is there light, is there not? So it tends to be what they call black and white or grayscale vision.
And would you say provides light in what? Or, I'm sorry, provides vision in low light?
Low light.
Low light, okay.
So in the middle of the night, your bladder wakes you up. For whatever reason, your bladder's like, up, full. You need to wake up. You need to go take care of this. Assuming that you don't want to turn the lights on and blind yourself, you're going to make your way to the bathroom, probably without turning on the lights. Why can you do that? Can you see big pieces of furniture? No? You should be able to. Okay. But there's dim light. If you pay attention, there will reach a point where you won't see color. You'll just see big, dark shape, lighter space. Dark shape, lighter space. But it keeps you from, hopefully, bashing into the great big dresser, and you can get safely to the bathroom to take care of business and then get back to bed without killing yourself in the process. That's where your rod cells come in. So they detect one pigment. Basically, they're there to detect, is there light, is there not? They work in low light conditions. They do not have sharp images because we talked about you have your photoreceptors, your bipolar cells, and then your ganglion cells. You have lots of bipolar cells that feed into a single ganglion cell, and lots of those bipolar cells. So lots of rods will feed into one bipolar cell, lots of bipolar cells will feed onto a single ganglion. What kind of a pattern is that? We can talk about patterns. How do we set that up?
Conversion.
That's a convergent pattern. Because of that, you don't get that sharpness that we like for our real clear vision. It's going to be a kind of fuzzy. This is probably the reason that when you were younger, or even sometimes I've had this happen as an adult, where you leave something out of place. And you don't remember that, oh, that's the bathrobe I hung up on the door. And it can look like a monster in the night. Because you can't actually tell what it is. You just know there's a shape that normally isn't there. And so I think that's where a lot of there's monsters in my bedroom come, is because you can't. And I've had it where I woke up and go, what the heck is that? You know, I know it's not a monster, but that's the first thing that tends to come to mind. Okay. Evidently have an overactive imagination. Or I'm a kid at heart, or both, I don't know. Okay, cone cells. Cone cells come to a point, hence cones. These are color vision cells. They come in three different types that respond to three different wavelengths of light. And there is an area in the posterior area, the macula lutea, has an area called the fovea centralis. You definitely want to remember the word fovea centralis. The fovea centralis is at the center of the macula lutea, and that is going to be where we have, this is our focal spot, if you will. So when we focus, this has nothing but cone cells. Each cone cell goes to its own bipolar cell, which goes to its own ganglion cell. So that is going to give us the sharpest, clearest vision we can get. Does that make sense? That if it's got the one-to-one-to-one to the brain, that's going to provide lots of information in a small amount of area. So this is literally our focal spot. This is where we're going to try to focus. One of the things that you can do if you're a little bit, it's kind of a parlor trick, it works really well for me. I am short-sighted, I don't wear my glasses to class, I leave them in the car so that I have them to drive, because that's where it's critical. If I do the close, far, close, far, close, far, I get incredible headaches with the glasses, so I just leave them, because I cannot write or read with them anymore, especially now, because I'm now developing old eyes, which means now I need reading glasses in addition to my distance glasses. But anyway, I wear distance glasses and just don't tend to bring them to class. If I look at the if I look at the clock at the back of the room, or I look at the thing that says nervous tissue, I can tell it's nervous tissue, number one, because I know we have a poster that's named that, and number two, I can kind of read it. But it's fuzzy, very fuzzy from where I'm standing, which isn't all that far away. But if you take your finger and you make a teeny, teeny, tiny little hole, suddenly now nervous tissue is much more clear because it helps me focus, or I can read the numbers. I can't read the clock right now because it has a glare from the lights, but normally I use the clock as my example. But you make that little teeny tiny hole, it takes out the rest of the information, focuses everything right on that fovea centralis, and it looks clearer. So a nice little parlor trick that you can do. And you can play all kinds of tricks on your eyes, it's kind of fun. So fovea centralis is all cones, and those cones each have their own direct line to the brain. So this is high resolution, it's color vision. However, it only works in relatively bright light. The cones, middle of the night, you need to get up and go to the bathroom, they're not working. There's not enough light for that, unless you leave your light on all night long, which I married a guy who can do that. Like, oh, turn off your lights, you're gonna drive me crazy. We drive each other crazy on a regular basis. Can't tell. But these are bright light. So cones are low light, basically the grayscale, help you identify large objects. This is going to actually tell you what you're looking at. So if we look at a little drawing that is representative of the retina, we have the pigmented layer, which is here. The pigment is designed to trap any stray light that hasn't interacted with our photoreceptors, so it does not bounce back. We want to just stop that because that, again, gives us clearer vision. The light actually comes in from here. So the light is going to come through. These are heading to the optic nerve. These are our ganglion cells. These are our kind of funny looking bipolar cells. And these, the last section here, these are rods, these are cones. That's actually where the photopigments are. So the last thing it encounters is going to be the photopigments. The light will actually travel through all the resting of them. That make sense? So light comes in that way. When they're doing the look in the back of the eyes, okay, they take the light or they use the little lens and the light to do. What they're checking for is they're checking for the health of your eyes. And if you look at a lot of retinas, you get used to saying, okay, this looks normal, this looks normal, wow, that looks weird. So this is a normal retina. Can you see the blood vessels? Awesome. Can you tell which ones are veins and which ones are arteries? How can you tell? The veins are wider. The arteries are really smaller. But are they color coded blue and red? No, they're just red, which is fine. This area here, which that looks like where a lot of the blood vessels are originating. That's your optic disc. Your optic disc is where your optic nerve leaves the eye. There are no photoreceptors there, so it's a blind spot. We're willing to have that blind spot because we have the good vision anyway. The other thing is, your brain will automatically fill in the spot where the blind spot is if you only have one eye working. It'll autofill. And there's probably a little parlor trick in your textbook where you stare at one section and then there's like a red dot that will turn into a green line. Various versions of that just to prove that you do actually have a blind spot. Which you do. This little dark area that's really hard to see, that's your macula lutea, which has your fovea centralis in it. I was never good enough at looking at the back of eyes to really be able to see that. But if you have high blood pressure, we were talking about hypertension earlier, instead of being nice and smooth, these will actually get thick and wobbly. So going in and having your eyes checked regularly and having the fundoscopic exam, this actually can help you detect a few things. There are also changes that will happen in people who have diabetes mellitus. They will have changes to their eye. I know that retinal detachment is very common. My mom has that. Don't remember what else they would look for. Yeah, not an ophthalmologist either. But that's what it would look like. So once again, if we divide our eye into anterior and posterior, the posterior segment is going to be filled with a jelly-like substance called vitreous humor. Vitreous humor, it's a very fragile jelly. When you go to dissect the cow eyes, it has a vitreous, but it usually falls apart really, like you go into the eye and it pretty much falls apart, becomes a lump. But it's kind of a jelly fluid. It helps support the posterior part of the lens and keep it in place. Supports the back of the lens to help make sure that that stays in place. And in that way, it helps with interocular pressure. What's interocular pressure? Pressure inside the eye. Sorry, intraocular pressure. The big thing to know about vitreous humor, it's formed in the embryo. If for some reason you damage it, you cannot grow it back. It's not replaced.
So it's amyotonic.
Pardon?
So it's amyotonic.
Correct. Well, I mean, it's fluid, but it's not secreted anymore.
Oh, okay.
The anterior segment. The anterior segment is further divided into the anterior chamber and posterior chamber. And the dividing line here is the iris. So the anterior chamber is going to go from the cornea, the inside of the cornea, to the anterior part of the iris, and the posterior chamber is from the iris to the lens. The whole thing contains aqueous humor, or the water fluid. It is continuously formed by part of the ciliary body, which is in the posterior chamber. So there's capillaries in the ciliary process. It is going to come up, come out through the pupil into the anterior chamber, and is drained by little canals at the edge of the cornea. Scleral venous sinuses, I guess is our new word, rather than canal of Schlemm. If something blocks up these drains, what do you think is going to happen to the pressure of the eye? It's going to increase. Does anyone know what an increase in intraocular pressure is called, what the disease is?
Glaucoma.
Glaucoma. Sudden onset glaucoma causes pretty much instant blindness or very rapid onset blindness. I guess in humans it tends to be a much slower onset where it causes damage, and if you can get the pressure down. But one of the ways the patients I used to see, if they came up with glaucoma, it was normally pretty sudden onset, and it was usually because it wouldn't drain. So this is going to supply the nutrients to the inside and remove waste. So it's secreted here, moves up, comes out, and is drained. And it'll actually be doing the same thing on the other side as well. That's the aqueous humor. And aqueous humor is very sensitive to maintaining the correct intraocular pressure. They used to do the little puff of air when you went into the eye doctor's office. Now they're doing a drop, which, as far as I'm concerned, stung like mad. I was not a happy person. But it's much better than the torture devices that we used to have to use, where basically you would topically anesthetize the dog's eye, make them look at the ceiling, and basically you set this little weighted device on their eye. Looked kind of like a medieval torture device. And then they came up with the pens, that you would do the same thing, but you would just touch the pen to it. I have no idea what they're using now. Okay, lens. Biconvex. It's going to be held in place by the suspensory ligaments. The muscles that are around it are circular. So when they are relaxed, it stretches the lens flap. And so the lens fibers, again, you have to see through this. Lens fibers are going to be continually added, so it becomes more dense and less flexible with age. A lot of this lack of flexibility is one of the reasons that even if you have been nearsighted your entire life, you may reach a point, I got there about a year and a half ago, not happy, where your arms are not long enough, that actually trying to do something close up you can't see because your lens does not accommodate for that. And so yes, it's very weird. I'm nearsighted, but if I need to do work on something really close, I have to wear close-up glasses, reading glasses. So any questions on different parts of the eye? One of the things I am going to ask you to know is the path of light as it comes in from the cornea through the aqueous humor, through the pupil, through the lens, through the vitreous humor, and to the retina. Because I mean like that. I'm also going to ask you to know from the photoreceptor to the bipolar cell, to the ganglion cell, to the optic nerve, to the optic chiasm, to the optic tracts. So there's a lot of ordering on this test. You should love it. Okay. But I'm just giving you a heads up on you need to know that. All right, so wave is actually electromagnetic radiation, wavelengths between 400 and 700 nanometers. Eyes are only going to respond to visible light because we can't detect it outside of the visible light range. Anything, I'm not entirely certain that I fully understand all of this because it's physics. Well, so the light packets are photons and they travel wave-like, and it's going to be broken up and respond to different wavelengths. What the eye perceives as the color is going to be a reflection of that wavelength. So grass is green because it absorbs all the colors except green. White reflects everything. Black absorbs everything. So here are our visible wavelengths. And so we have the blue cones down at 420. We have our rods at about 500. Green and red are 530 and 560 respectively. Now, if any of you, painted when you were a little kid and you mixed the yellow and you mixed the red and the green and got this kind of crummy looking brown, that's not actually what happens in light. So in light, it changes. You get different things that you put together, and it has different colors. In the genetic disease of color blindness, where it usually happens in men because it's inherited on the X chromosome, usually that comes from a genetic lack of the pigment for either the red or green. So they'll have one but not both. And so they perceive red and green to be the same color. It's not that they can't perceive any colors, it's just not as much of an array. Well, I guess they have some new glasses out that they're having guys who are colorblind try that allows them to actually see the full color. They're like, wow, you see all these different colors all the time? Yeah, we do. And Rod's kind of in the middle. So it's a combination of how it all gets sorted out that gives us the color spectrum we can see. So refraction. Refraction is where you go to grab something at the bottom of the pool and you put your hand down and you miss. One of the things behind, I know that Mythbusters did a big thing on this, and they're like, yeah, you hear this story of the person who's hiding under the water and they still get shot. It's like, well, if the person who's in the air aims into the water, they're probably going to miss because of refraction. So refraction is kind of like this, where it's bent because of a surface of water. Our eyes are going to do this. Most of it happens at the cornea, sort of bending towards the pupil, actually. But then we're also going to further refract the light on purpose at the lens. So refraction and lenses, the idea is we want our focus to actually be at that fovea centralis. We want it to be where it's supposed to be. So you have your focal points. The image is upside down and reversed. So the image in the back of your head is going to be of you guys upside down and backwards. It's okay, my brain sorts it out. And you all look like you're sitting on the ground. So anyway, that's the way it is going to be. So here's pathway of light. Woohoo! Pathway of light is going to go to the cornea through the aqueous humor. It's going to pass through the pupil and go to the lens, through the vitreous humor, to the photoreceptors, through that retina to get to the photoreceptors. So we refract when it comes into the cornea, when it hits the lens, when it leaves the lens. And the idea is to try to focus it on that focal point. Most of the refraction happens at the cornea, but we can't control the cornea. We can't just, oh, I'm going to change my cornea. It does not happen. So the only place we can adjust is at the lens. We have different focuses for distance vision and close-in vision. Our default, if you will, is distance vision. And the distant vision is where the eyes are supposed to be best adapted for. So the far point, once it reaches about 20 feet for normal vision, your eyes are going to be completely relaxed to try to focus on things that are further away. The cornea and lens are supposed to, with the lens fully pulled, because the muscle relaxes, which makes it bigger. When that's fully flattened, you should be able to focus on things far away. The ciliary muscles are completely relaxed. That's why it's the default. And it pulls and stretches it nice and flat. So at a distance, things come in relatively evenly. We cross, but this is flat and it's nice and thin. So someone with perfect vision, 20 feet, they'd be able to see this nice and clearly. Focusing in for close vision requires some more work. We are going to have to contract the muscle to allow the lens to get thicker. So here's some fancy words you're going to want to know. Accommodation. Accommodation of the lens is going to change where that focal point goes so that we're focusing on something more close in. The near point of vision, the closest point at which the eye could focus, which at this point is now about that far in front of me. I used to be able to focus here. I can't anymore. Darn old eyes. They actually call it presbyopia, which literally translates into old eyes. So, loss of accommodation. Yay. Constriction of the pupils. To help you focus, your pupils will tend to constrict. And convergence of the eyeballs. All right? So what are you going to do to help focus on something that's close together? Do you remember when you were a kid and you used to make yourself go cross-eyed? That's convergence. One of the things you won't necessarily notice when you're doing convergence is that there's also a rotational component. But you won't necessarily notice that. You'll just know that you see the eyes go together. So we constrict this muscle, which allows the lens to get thicker, and hopefully it still hits our focal point on the fovea centralis. So I'm only going to use the pictures. I'm not going to go in with all the talk. But an emmetropic eye, which is a normal vision eye, this allows the focal plane to work correctly. A eye with myopia, the eye itself is too long. It's probably the only thing in my body that's too long, because I'm short, but evidently my eyeball is too long. And so it focuses in front. So I end up having to wear corrective lenses, which are concave, to spread it out to focus them again. So this would be what my eyeglasses would look like. I probably have a little more curvature at this point in my life than that. So again, the emmetropic eye, a hyperopic eye, is farsighted. The eye itself is too short. So in order to focus, you have a convex lens, which shortens it up to where it needs to be. So myopia, which is nearsightedness, hugely common. So what's an astigmatism?
Well, astigmatism is where basically your cornea is like pointed more.
The cornea is the wrong shape.
Yes.
So if your cornea is the wrong shape, you're still not going to get this. And so that needs to be corrected usually with lenses that are fitted fitted somewhat specifically for it. But yeah, that's a problem with the cornea.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how they do the, because I'm developing astigmatism as well.
Yay!
Yay! And I wear contacts.
Well, they have actually started making contacts. They're weighted contacts where like part of the lens is bigger than the other. And because my husband wore contacts for a little while, and his main problem is astigmatism. He's very slightly farsighted, but his main problem is astigmatism. My son has astigmatism. Like, oh gee, you couldn't have gotten the no astigmatism and just been nearsighted like a normal person, right? So yeah, my son does not like to wear his glasses. We're still kind of fighting with that. All right, so phototransduction. In a nutshell, the photopigments change shape when they interact with light. I know, that's probably very surprising. But it changes shape as it absorbs light. They're very, obviously they're vulnerable to damage. If there is a problem with the retinal detachment, they will actually disintegrate and stop working. Intense light can destroy them. They're going to constantly be in the process of being renewed. So we have our cones, which is down where the discs are. These discs are what actually contain the photopigments. So it's pretty much the last thing the light hits. Here's some discs that are breaking off, and they're going to grow some new ones. Okay, so rods are used for what kind of vision? Dim lighting, low lighting. Cones are going to be used for bright light. Cones have color. Rods don't. So rods are very sensitive to light. They can pick up light in very dim light for night vision. Gray tones only because it only has one pigment. These are converging pathways. So they're kind of fuzzy and indistinct images. So, you know, you can have 100 rods that will go to a few ganglion cells, or will end up on one ganglion cell. The other thing that they're useful for is we find them in the peripheral. They're used as motion detectors, which is why I can tell you, yes, animals can see color because they have cone cells, but they don't see it as brightly as we do. They have a lot more rod cells. They tend to be, many of them are, especially the prey animals, are much more adapted to motion detection. So cones have a low sensitivity, so they need bright light. They're going to react very quickly, and they've got the three different colors, and if you put them together, you can get lots of colors. Non-converging pathways, very detailed vision. Some cones, particularly those in the fovea centralis, have their own bipolar cell and own ganglion cell. So it's a 1-to-1-to-1. Very accurate, high acuity. So these are some of the differences which you will want to know, of course. So this is a quick drawing that I wanted to, I didn't want to go on to a lot of this, but you will have this retinal which is bent, and then you will have it where it's straight. Basically, it just causes a change when it detects light. Now, what happens if you walk, okay, it's dark and you turn on the light? Or you walk from a place which is kind of dim out into the bright sunshine. What happens?
People's diary? Or contract.
You regret it. Why do you regret it?
Kind of takes the aesthetic to be able to open your eyes.
Okay.
Adjust.
What do you see for that couple of seconds?
Just light.
Like
You're blinded
flashing in.
by the white of the light. what's happening is all of these very sensitive cells, boom, get activated. Now, we do have an adaptation that basically turns off your rod cells when it is bright out, so that you're not getting blinded. Yay for not getting blinded. Now, you come out from, or you turn your light out at night. Can you immediately see things? Just take a few. Takes a few. We have to turn them back on when we get into the dim light. Now, if you happen to be in a room that's just getting dark and you're hanging out and it's just getting darker and darker and darker, this will happen much more slowly. Or if you're watching it get lighter and lighter and lighter, you don't have that sudden, I'm blind, but when you do a change. So this, I just wanted to show you that when it's light and when it's dark, there's actually a physical change. The other thing is we do have an adaptation where it turns off the rods in bright light. So bleaching can occur, they say bleaching can occur in starlight. I've never actually been blinded by starlight. Of course, I don't tend to have that as my only light source. I live in suburbia. I'm considering Fort Collins suburbia. So in bright light, the bleaching happens so fast that you get that flash of white, usually with pain, and then you're not functional, and you can't see with your cones either because you're being overwhelmed by this rods, and it takes a few minutes for your cones to start working. So the cones are going to respond to the bright light. When they come online, you'll have your color vision. So the light adaptation, you see the glare because everything is so strongly stimulated that the pigments basically overwhelm you. After 5 to 10 minutes, the rods turn off. Otherwise, all you'd be is blinded if we didn't turn that system off. The sensitivity is going to decrease because the cones are less sensitive and the cones are going to adapt and you actually begin to see things. Dark adaptation. You're going to see the blackness because there isn't enough light for the cone cells to work. Cone cells don't have to be turned off, they just stop working. But it takes a few minutes. Usually it takes about 30 minutes for they do full adaptation to dark, where all of your rod cells will come back online and be able to use. Pupils are going to dilate, but sensitivity maximizes 20 to 30 minutes. So if you're going to go try to sneak around in the dark, you need to sit outside, dark light for. Okay, visual pathway to the brain. From our rod or cone, what does it go through? Bipolar. And then it goes to ganglion cells. The axons of the ganglion cells are going to come together. They're going to leave at the optic disc, which is that spot, the blind spot, and it's going to form the optic nerve. Optic nerve is cranial nerve number 2. The medial fibers from each eye are going to cross over. So half the information crosses over at the spot called the optic chiasm. Your book calls it chiasma. It's the same thing. And then it's going to become an optic tract. So we carry information over, we trade half of it, and then we have the optic tracts. The optic tracts are going to go, we're going to watch how this crosses. So it's then going to go through the thalamus. Remember the thalamus? And then it's going to go to the occipital lobes, the primary visual area, the occipital lobes. Once it gets fully processed and processed and processed, it will give us our conscious perception. of what we are seeing at any given time. So this is a little chart showing how half the information comes. So from both eyes, we have the fixation point. We have information being collected here on the right side of both eyes. We have information here which is being collected on the left side of both eyes. So the left side of the eye collects information from the right side of the eye collects information from the left. Everything's crossed. This should make sense. So information, I'm sorry, this is the left eye. Left eye comes back, right eye comes back. Information from the right half of the right eye goes back to be processed in the right lobe. Information from the left half of both eyes comes back to be processed in the left lobe. So if you have damage to one side of your occipital lobe, you will only be able to see one or the other field of vision for both eyes. Because it won't get processed once it gets back. So does that make sense? There's little areas here. This is only collected from the left eye. This is only collected from the right eye. Everything in the middle, we see with both eyes. And so that's where we get the depth perception. We call the stereoscopic. Stereo being two, scope being vision or see or something like that. But stereoscopic vision, where you get to see from both eyes. And that allows us to do depth perception. If we were to look at it from a very simple filing of animals, we would be considered predators because our eyes are in the front. And that depth perception is hugely important if we are tool users because we've got to be able to aim. We think about prey animals, the sheep I talked about, the horses I'll talk about. Their eyes are actually on the sides of their head. They have almost 360 vision. But it's not the sharp vision like we rely on. It's mostly to detect incoming predators. Does that make sense? Any questions? Are you guys going to kill me for information overload?
That's that point.
I got at least one positive answer for that.
10 weeks in,
All right, so if you have any questions for me tomorrow, I will